Timothée Chalamet as Scrub.
Oh my God. I would watch that, and it might be fire, honestly. It wouldn't be faithful, but it'd probably be good.
Hell yeah. Just like a recent anime adaptation of a comic book that we're talking about
Yes,
today.
that's right.
Not faithful,
right.
but good.
Welcome, everyone, to the Over Under Movies podcast, where we take a prominent figure or franchise in the world of filmmaking and ask the simple question, are they overrated or are they underrated? Today's episode is going to be a little different. We're going to be talking about a TV show, one that's very special to me and my guest, Julie CL, Julian. They are a teacher, an actor, a writer, a tabletop role-playing game enthusiast, or superstar. Julian, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for taking me into this wonderful decked out room. It's pretty sweet.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We tried hard. It's good to, this is like the first time we're formally meeting, but I really appreciate you coming out here. I've been a friend and fan of yours ever since we first interacted on Twitter.
Can I talk about that interaction?
Yeah.
For some reason, I think you made a tweet about the Warlock class in D&D or something like that. And I made a quote tweet or comment about how Warlocks are awesome. And then you were like, oh, hey, another Broadway beat writer. And we both wrote for the same satire site.
Yeah.
And just mutual followed from there.
Yeah.
And then I invited you on to play a Filipino tabletop game on the Twitch channel that I work with. And it seems like we have a lot in common, which is great.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Today we're talking about Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. It is a television series developed by Brian Lee O'Malley and Ben David Grabinski for Netflix. That's directly from Wikipedia. It was kind of announced as an adaptation of the graphic novel Scott Pilgrim vs. the Universe, bringing back the original cast of the movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Everyone was very excited for what was deemed possibly like a more faithful adaptation, or one being adapted to screen that made more sense than like a live action adaptation. But it turned out to be a little different than we anticipated. Julie, what drew you to the Scott Pilgrim franchise initially?
I saw the movie and I enjoyed it. And then I saw the comic books in my local bookstore and I was intrigued by the art style. It was much more anime inspired than I expected it to be. And anime inspired anything is honestly how to hook me into stuff. You get colorful hair, facial expressions. I was intrigued. I flipped through the first volume and the last volume.
Oh,
because I already knew the story. I was like, let me just like see what this is about. And I saw the art style, I saw the jokes. I'm like, let me just get it all. Let me get it all and become very obsessed with this series. And that was me at age like 17, I think, like 12 years ago.
Nice. Oh yeah.
Sheesh.
We were younger, like much younger than Scott Pilgrim when that movie came out, and I also first experienced the story through that movie. And like, so 23 or 22 in the film was like an age that seemed far off.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to have my shit together by the time I'm that guy's age. Now we're both older than Scott Pilgrim. How do you feel about that? Just consuming this story again as an adult?
I completely agree with you. It's bizarre to have that 10-year difference. And the comic books were written in 2004, right? So that was like even longer ago. I think the thing that gets me is, as a 29-year-old, when I think of the average 22 or 23-year-old, including myself at that age, very relationship focused, very much trying to get their life together. And I think that kind of sheds a sympathetic light on the characters of the novel, just having been there now. I kind of look back on it as they're still kind of dumb kids, even though they're 23.
Yeah, definitely. Like, when I first watched the movie, I didn't view them as dumb kids. I viewed them as like adults with adult problems, I guess. But now they're very melodramatic. Like, Ramona at first appears to be like an aloof person that has her life somewhat together, and that she's like really cool.
Yeah.
And that she's handling like this League of Evil X's well. But she's not handling it well. She's handling it like any like young to mid-20s person would be doing. So yeah, I think everyone does come off a little bit more sympathetic by that token. So we mentioned that the new show, which is an anime, is a little different from what we were expecting. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So you should check out the show, first of all, if you haven't seen it, if you're at all interested, if you're a fan of the original comics or the movie. The show is built to be rewarding for you. So check it out. Don't get yourself spoiled. So Scott dies in the first episode, or at least that's the implication, as instead of Matthew Patel exploding into coins, Scott Pilgrim does. And I just thought they were extending the story. I thought they were adding like a bring Scott back to life element, but then everything changes from there. Second episode, Scott Pilgrim's funeral. Wild considering the cultural paradigm of the show too. Like, this is the main character. This is the guy who goes on the emotional journey, the journey of becoming a mature functioning adult in a mature functioning relationship. It's not his story anymore.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So basically, Ramona kind of becomes the protagonist from that point forward in the story, and she's sort of investigating Scott's disappearance. And she ends up suspecting each one of her evil exes, who are still ostensibly in this evil league together at the start of the show. But sort of as soon as Scott's gone, that league kind of falls apart. Because Matthew Patel stages a coup against Gideon Graves, who is like the main bad guy of the movie and the graphic novel series. I wanted to talk about that. I thought that was really cool because Matthew Patel really doesn't have too much to do in the original story. So seeing him get a chance to shine was really nice. I also feel like out of like such a stacked cast, and we look at the cast now and so many people blew up after this, Matthew Patel's actor maybe didn't have like, I mean, he doesn't play a Marvel superhero.
Yeah.
So the
fact, or a DC superhero in the case of Brandon Routh.
Yeah, true. So just him being able to like break out and get like so much more to do in the show and highlight like his abilities as a voice actor, I thought was really cool.
100%. And a friend of mine pointed out, it kind of makes sense that Matthew Patel stood a chance against Gideon because he has actual superpowers.
Yeah.
Most of the evil exes don't. It's just him and our vegan psychic Todd Ingram.
Right.
Gideon has the glow in the comics, but he doesn't really use it in the show. He does one blast of it at the end of Takes Off.
Right.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. And that was such a cool fight too.
Yeah.
Yeah, what'd you think of like the animation as a whole?
Oh, it was brilliant. And Science Saru is a great studio to entrust the property with. I'm really excited for Dandadan, which they're doing soon as well. It was faithful to the comic. It was super fluid. I really had no complaints. It was just sick all around.
Yeah, and like we got to see like new fights that we haven't seen before in the comic or the movie. So it was cool watching them come up with that and then making those feel so energetic and like interesting, and they were all distinct. I think my favorite was probably the Roxy versus Ramona fight in the video store.
Thinking the same thing, especially because that was experimental with the medium of animation, you know, jumping back and forth between genres of movie and television could have worked in a comic book, but when you actually get to see like the quality of the camera flicker, I feel like they were doing something unique to animation there, you know?
Yeah, that was cool. So this show does change a lot about like the Scott Pilgrim mythos, I would say. We can just spoil the twist. So if you haven't seen this yet and you want to, you should go watch it. But basically, Scott disappears, and by episode 6 or 7, you find out that he's been taken to the future by his future self. Older Scott, 37-year-old Scott, who we are luckily still younger than.
For now.
He is divorced from Ramona, and he is embittered, and he is trying to prevent himself from ever having dated her in the first place. The closest comparison I can make, and the thing that I see people online being upset about, is that like I feel like some people are having the same reaction to like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, when he was revealed to be like this grumpy old man type of thing. I feel like there's some people who don't like seeing this ostensible hero that we have grown up with as like just a 37-year-old loser.
Yeah.
How did you react to seeing older Scott being kind of like that?
I was sad at first because soon after that they revealed that Scott and Ramona got divorced, right? And the comics meant a lot to me as a younger person. And it was kind of sad to think that the person whose journey I followed was like not entirely successful, right? Like he goes through all that development and still messes up in the end. But at the same time, I love anti-nostalgia properties, especially in an era where everything is getting remade or getting sequels. I thought it was kind of punk rock for The Last Jedi to be like, hey, you know, maybe it wasn't a happy ending. Maybe your main character wasn't perfect. And once I kind of got over maybe Scott didn't get the happy ending we wanted him to, I was able to roll with and appreciate the rest of it.
Cool. So the reason why he's like so sad and grumpy now is that he got divorced. But what do you suspect caused problems like for older Scott in his relationship? Like what type of sort of, I guess, failures do you think, or obstacles do you think that they were faced with that we didn't see them already overcome in the original story?
It's got to be insecurity, right? Like Scott's whole arc in the comics was they're kind of manifested through the swords that he gains. He gains the power of love when he decides to fight for Ramona, and he gains the power of understanding when he understands that he and Gideon are parallels to each other. And those are like the character arcs he completed. In the movie, ironically, he gains the power of self-respect instead. And I kind of feel like he didn't do that in this current version, this iteration.
Yeah.
He doesn't respect himself. He's not really proud of where he's been because he tries to erase it, right? That's kind of my theory, that he just didn't work on himself enough.
It's almost like he attached himself to Ramona like after the original story ended and never continued building himself. So I guess he's like mentally stuck at 23, which has to be tough.
That's something that speaking personally, as someone who viewed myself as like super nerdy and like unappealing, etc., when you start dating people that you think are more attractive than you, like the idea of them breaking it off with you, like can really mess you up for a little while. And it's not a super mature reaction, but this person like suddenly makes you feel better about yourself. Like, oh, I'm an appealing enough personality to date someone who I think is like a lot cooler than me. Maybe that means I'm cool too. Oh, now they're breaking it up with me? Like, maybe I'm not actually that cool anymore. Maybe it was just like a fling.
Yeah, I could see myself maybe now like losing my sense of self if I had like a really cool partner and they broke up with me.
Yeah.
It's just really a challenging thing for anyone to go to. Although old Scott like very particularly does not deal with it well. He uses time travel to kidnap himself, and then later on he tries to battle and I guess kill everyone that he knew when he was 23.
His plan was not clear, but he was in a room alone for 10 years.
Yeah, he went a little crazy. It was interesting.
Voiced by Will Forte in the future.
Yes. Do you think that the anime format made it stand out or stand above the film in various ways? Do you have a favorite of the two in terms of like style and action?
Absolutely. I think the film gets a lot of style excellently done because, it's Edgar Wright. Like, he's known for visually experimental, funny, quick humor that by the time you process what's happening, the next one-liner is already gearing itself up.
Yeah.
But a big part of the Scott Pilgrim comics that appealed to me were the characters and the time we got to spend with them. You got to see Scott like going on walks with Ramona, bumping into his high school friends. You got to see Kim Pine living her life. You got to see Steven like struggling with his stuff. And just due to like the shortened time in a movie, you don't really get that. It was just Scott's story. We didn't get to see Ramona's character development that she got in the comic.
Yes.
Where Ramona had a whole arc in the comic about learning to not run away anymore, and she gains the power of love that Scott did because she finally commits to protecting him as well, which is awesome. It's this cool moment in the comics where Gideon attacks Scott, she blocks it with her bag, and then the sword comes out of the hole in her bag.
Yeah.
It's so cool, and that's Ramona committing to protect Scott, which she doesn't get to do in the movie due to the runtime. So definitely check out the comic if you've seen the movie and like it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I love the comic. Would you say the comic is like your favorite of the three?
No, I like the anime more than the comic now.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So where's it rank for you? So comic, movie, anime, and then video game, which I haven't played, but you have. Where do you rank those four?
Yeah. The video game is, I would say, an expansion of the comic because it's a beat 'em up. It's a side-scrolling beat 'em up. You're going through the story of Scott Pilgrim. There's a few different moments in it. Like, you get to see like a one-winged angel form of Gideon, and that's like the final boss, which is cool. And what's interesting is you get different endings depending on which character you picked. At the start of the game, prior to DLC, you could play as Scott, Ramona, Kim Pine, or Stephen Stills, and they would each give you a different ending. And that was really the only bit of new narrative that was added to the video game, like the what-ifs of the different endings. Like in Kim Pine's ending, for example, she starts dating Knives, which is weird. She's still 17, but they had a moment in the comics where they like drunkenly made out, which, you know, don't do that. Don't make out with 17-year-olds, even when you're drunk. Ramona's ending is the same ending as the comic book in the movie. She and Scott get together. Scott's ending, interestingly, he gets together with Envy, Knives, and Ramona. Or sorry, not Envy, Knives, and Ramona. Envy, Knives, and Kim, and Ramona leaves him.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
So I think that's the most thought-provoking thing that happens in the game. They don't give Scott the happy ending if you play as him. And I'm so info dumping right now, but I just think this is so fascinating.
Yeah.
My theory as to why is that one of the bosses you fight is Nega Scott, like Scott's dark self, where in the comic book he has to like make peace with it, right? But it's a beat 'em up game. If you're playing a Scott and you beat up the Nega Scott, you're not making peace with it. So I think Scott ends up as a bad person if you play as him.
Wow.
Isn't that kind of cool?
That is cool, yeah.
Video game is decent to go the long way around.
Buy that game after this.
Yeah. Comic book is great. Comic book is a great, fully fleshed out story where you get to experience a lot of growth, not only for the main characters, but for all the awesome side characters. Kim Pine, my favorite. And the movie just didn't quite get to do the same thing. I think the reason I would put Scott Pilgrim Takes Off at the top is because it is a reflection of the current paradigm that we are in. I'm describing Scott Pilgrim Takes Off as a show that is justice for every hipster woman who was called the Ramona Flowers of a nebbish non-committal guy. Because I've dated a lot of people with dyed hair, and a lot of them have been like, oh, you're my Ramona Flowers, by their boyfriend who ended up breaking up with them after a few months. I feel like it's a reflection of how far the zeitgeist has come and how far maybe Brian Lee O'Malley's views on like a traditional hero's journey has come. So that was my info dump as to how I would rank them and why.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I have a question on here that says, do you think that part of what the goal of this anime is to like correct the legacy of Scott Pilgrim? Because I think you're right. Like a lot of what the culture views Scott Pilgrim as is like Ramona Flowers is this manic pixie dream girl type. Scott Pilgrim's just a shitty dude, but he gets to be the hero and he gets what he wants in the end. And there's like been sort of a backlash to that. Do you feel that this was made, at least with some intention, to like address the criticism that it's gotten?
I think it definitely was. If not to address the criticism, then to show how the author's point of view on everything has changed. And I do think it's fair to point out that comic books are not as one-dimensional as like, oh, Ramona's like a manic pixie dream girl, because she goes through her own development and like steps up and like learns to stop running away. And that's huge when the moment again where she gains the power of love. But I think a lot of people can take the wrong messages from a piece of media. You know, they can look at Scott's journey of being a shitty non-committal guy who gets the girl in the end and be like, yeah, I'm a shitty non-committal guy, but I'm working on it, and just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And not take any further reflection.
Yeah. Definitely. Just making Ramona the main character, I think, rectifies what a lot of people found flaws with in the movie. I think the scene where Scott very explicitly says, I shouldn't have dated you, Knives. Apparently, it's societally frowned upon for a 23-year-old to date a 17-year-old. That had to have been put in just because it's kind of like a red flag every time someone boots up this movie or like reads the comic for the first time. That seemed to be very much to undo a problematic thing.
It certainly was. And again, to be fair to the comic book, Scott was not in the right about it. Like everyone was calling him out on it from the start. But also, there's a moment, I think when Knives comes of age and Scott and Ramona are kind of on thin ice in the second to last volume or the last volume, I forget. Scott looks at Knives and has a big panel where he points at her and he's like, we should have sex, casual sex. And it's like, she says no, they make out and it's awkward. And it's like, it's supposed to show he's not a good guy, but he's still so much worse than in this when he realizes maybe I shouldn't have done that like 6 episodes in.
Yeah. So that's an interesting part of this anime is that Scott almost gets to speed run his character growth. Like he learns a lot more just by seeing his future self. Do you think he grew more in this show than he does in the graphic novel or the movie?
I think so. And I don't think it feels rushed because, like you were saying, he sees his future self. Even his biggest point of character development in the comic was interacting with the Negascot, which is this reflection of himself. He just speed ran running into a reflection of himself.
That's a great way to put it.
It's a parallel. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, so while Scott's off doing his thing, we talked about him a lot. We got to give some ups to Ramona. She's doing this detective work. She's the one who starts fighting people. I can't remember exactly how many battles she has, but she fights Roxy.
Yep.
And then they make up, and it's very beautiful. She helps Lucas Lee get out of a situation with ninja paparazzi. She fights Wallace Wells' stunt doubles, but she's the one who's really doing most of the versus fights. Like, there's quite a few combats in this that are just off the cuff, but the really important ones always have like the split screen versus. So what did you think of that? Like, did you find that following her as a protagonist, doing all the fights, was that as interesting for you as like reading the comics with Scott as the hero, especially from the perspective of like if you grew up with a more male gendered point of view and identified, I guess, with male characters more, were you able to kind of break that with this character?
Yeah, and I think that's very much intentional too. With Scott fighting the 7 evil X's, it's a video game parody, right? These are the boss fights you need in order to get to the princess at the end. And it starts like Ramona is going to fight all the evil X's because Roxy runs up to her and fights her. But then next episode, she doesn't end up fighting Lucas Lee. She helps him. She doesn't end up fighting Todd Ingram. She watches him have a gay panic and collapse into depression because he got in too deep with Kieran Culkin, aka Wallace Wells in this case. They break the boss fight formula. That's another thing they set you up to believe. You're like, oh, this is going to be a boss fight show. And then that's not what it is. This is a show about her reaching closure with her exes, who aren't evil. They're just damaged people. It's different when it's Scott, the young male protagonist, fighting 7 evil jocks or bullies or whatever. This is Ramona finding human connections with people. And in the case of Roxy, it was kind of beating the shit out of each other until they could feel their emotions. But in the case of Lucas Lee, it was helping him get away from the paparazzi. In the case of Todd Ingram, it was just leaving him alone because he's bad news and cheats on everybody.
So in the comic, Todd is a cheater. He cheats with another band member.
Lynette with the robot arm, I believe.
And then he cheats again in this, but but he also has a homosexual awakening. I saw a question on the Your Mileage May Vary page for this TV show.
Yeah, breaking open the TV tropes tome of information.
Yeah, I try not to dig into it too much for these, but there was a question on there that I just thought was really interesting. Was Wallace's affair with Todd just him trying to get into Todd's pants because Todd is hot? Or did he also do it to screw with Envy as payback for how she treated Scott?
Ooh. Now, we don't see a lot of how Envy treated Scott in the show. But yeah, Envy was a much bigger part of the comic. She was not always this high fashion beauty glamour pop star. She was a nerdy girl for a little while. She had a Revolutionary Girl Utna poster in the room in the comics. Right. That is actually not something I considered. I think Wallace might have been in it for himself, but there was just kind of a bonus of getting back at Envy. Because Wallace does clearly care about Scott, but he's not above being petty.
I mean, I don't really think that was the intention of this new pairing, but I like to read it that way because some of the only times that Wallace kind of drops some of his pretense and like actually worries about Scott is just when Envy shows up. Most of the time, if Scott's in trouble, Wallace doesn't really care. But when Envy is causing the trouble, he gets like pretty upset about it and worried. So I like to think that he did start this affair as like an extra petty type of thing to get back at someone that hurt his friend.
You know what's also funny about that is it was kind of pointed out in the comics that Envy fights Ramona and Wallace like as a tag team, where Ramona's fighting Envy and Wallace is kind of acting as her shield, and then he goes to the bathroom and leaves Ramona alone, and then she gets her ass kicked, which is great. It's totally reversed in the show, right? It becomes Ramona and Envy versus Wallace just because of their feud. But it's always Envy versus Wallace in those pairings.
Yeah.
It's just Ramona who gets flipped around.
Yeah, so Envy and Wallace are going to hate each other in any adaptation of this.
I love that.
Okay, so we talked a lot about what we liked about this show. Was there anything that you didn't like about it?
I think there were moments of the voice acting where you could tell who the experienced voice actors were and who weren't. And I watched it both in English and Japanese to kind of make the comparison. I love Mary Elizabeth Winstead as an actor. I think her level of emotion, specifically in the Roxy fight, did not match the same level that was brought by the Japanese voice actress Ai Faruz, who also voices Jolene in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Power and Chainsaw Man. Like, she's a very experienced voice actor. And you can see it when she's going like, Roxy! Like, really, like, putting her heart into it. And I feel like the more subtle performance from Mary Elizabeth Winstead worked in everywhere except for those big emotional moments. So it's awesome that they got the cast back, but I think you could tell who were the voice actors who could get a lot of those levels in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Were there any standouts for you?
Chris Evans? What a surprise. Like, I know he's done VO work before, but he was so fun.
He's great. And he sounds like just like he was putting on a voice like in the live action one too. And he kind of just matches that, but takes it even higher. I was most pleasantly surprised, I think, by Michael Cera himself.
Yeah.
He doesn't sound like Michael Cera in this. He's doing like a younger voice for Scott Pilgrim. And it's one that I think fits the original character a little bit better.
Yeah.
He's got a little bit more energy. He's a little bit less nerdy type of dork and more of just like a energetic slacker. So yeah, I was really surprised and impressed by him. And then I think we've talked about this before. We were not surprised and we were expecting a good performance from Mae Whitman.
Yep.
And she obviously showed up and did her job.
She's probably the most experienced voice actor on that roster, I think by a significant margin, right?
She's great. Yeah, it was so cool seeing this cast together again.
Yeah, 100%. Like, my criticisms really are minor. I think one criticism I would have as far as plot structure is what we were talking about before recording this, where even though you found out Scott and Ramona get divorced, like, old Ramona is so quick to say to older Scott, "You're the love of my life," even after 10 years apart. And I just feel like that's not what happens after a breakup. You know? I think about the people that I dated 10 years ago, and I'm like, shoot, that was crazy what happened. My feelings are not the same as they were.
Yeah, it's tough. She was kind of immediately accepting of, like, Scott again, and it was a little strange. I had a couple of things I didn't like in the show. One thing that you mentioned earlier, I did not like Will Forte voicing future Scott.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, you do your thoughts, and I'll piggyback.
I just think it should have been Michael Cera. Like you said, this is supposed to be a reflection of the character.
Yeah.
I think the best way to do that is to have Michael Cera in his big boy grown-up voice, just being his 30-something-year-old self.
Yeah.
And actually getting to, like, show his range as an actor and be sad and be a scared, divorced, insecure man. I think that would have been great. I think Will Forte is also a little too recognizable as, like, a voice actor. Like, I heard him and I was like, okay, they got a celebrity voice actor for this. Great. You know, I don't think it's on the level of him, like, being in Scoob playing Shaggy when it should have been Matthew Lillard. But I do think it was, like, completely unnecessary to bring him on.
I was so conflicted on it because, again, having watched both dubs, Japanese older Scott and even older Scott are played much more seriously, like a much lower voice, like more serious characters. And that makes them more intimidating. But also, like, you kind of have to weigh, are you supposed to laugh at Scott? Because Scott's always kind of the butt of the joke in this whole situation. It's kind of pathetic, everything that his older incarnations do. But I think what I landed on as my big complaint with Will Forte's performance is that I feel like he was playing something more inspired by Western cartoony animation, and everyone else was taking anime direction. Will Forte was looking for, just based off my impression, the funniest, silliest ways to deliver each line, which works in, like, a fun slapstick thing. But there was a clear emotional core for older Scott and even older Scott that I don't think was there. He was just kind of, like, shrugging it off, like, yeah, you know, like, I'm a pathetic dude, whatever. Ah.
Yeah. I also think it doesn't, like, lend itself to being the surprise main villain of the show.
Yeah.
Like, I think you're right. He's doing this very cartoony thing. And he does give, like, a good, like, he's clearly a talented performer and voice actor.
He's super funny.
He's doing probably what he set out to do.
Yeah.
I just don't think it worked in this show. The second thing that I didn't like that much in this is that I feel like the twins are still kind of the, like, least developed exes. And even though they actually get lines this time, in the film they don't speak at all because they were two Japanese actors that didn't speak English.
Yep.
This time they got, I think, one Japanese actor that does speak English.
Julian C. I might be pronouncing his last name wrong.
Yeah.
He was in Only Murders in the Building, I believe.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, like he got to do some cool stuff, but I still felt like compared to everyone else getting closure with Ramona, these two I don't think had that kind of arc, did they?
No, they definitely didn't. Part of me feels like that's fine because they're not so much involved with Ramona. They're just like, oh, we're not going to fight Scott. We're bros in the future. See you, bro.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's a funny moment. I kind of feel like it's okay that they didn't get closure with Ramona because it feels like their relationship was very whirlwind and quick and maybe not as emotional as the other ones. Ramona hurt them because she dated both of them at the same time without telling the other. And I feel like they can get over it and shrug it off. But I agree. They were very underdeveloped. I'd love to see more of them. They got a lot of attention in the comics where they were assholes. They were such assholes in the comic. They didn't get that chance in the live action version to be assholes or to be suddenly endearing characters like Lucas Lee, who's a new favorite of mine, which is wild.
Yeah, like the twins, it was cool to find out that they were bros with Scott. That was nice, and it was kind of cute. And I guess that almost is their closure, just like not only the fact that they can get over this girl, but the fact that they can be really close friends with the person that she ends up marrying, and that they make music together too. I think that shows like growth, being able to create something with someone who was once your enemy. So I guess there is some closure for them, but I do wish there had been more for them to do.
I wish that is also because the robot is so prominent. You know, the robot 01, who is the one who actually helps kidnap Scott. Their whole connection to it was like, oh yeah, we can create a time traveling robot, and that was it.
Yeah, I feel like younger Scott should have met them, and then they could have had some interactions there to kind of give them the same type of, shine that all the other exes had. But it's okay. It's okay. The only other thing I didn't like is that Ramona did not list a bunch of T's. Why do you think they did that? I feel like it would have been easier. I think in the movie, right, like, I think Ramona, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, had the T list in front of her and was reading it. I think that's a fun fact that I read, but it might be, she might have just memorized her lines. But I feel like it should be easier voice acting for her to deliver this T monologue. Why do you think they took it out?
I think it just has to be time. They were getting to the points a lot faster. There were a lot of moments of Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life that were cut from episode 1. A lot of like interactions between the bands. Crash and the Boys.
Oh yeah,
is completely not there. The whole thing in Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is like, oh, Crash and the Boys couldn't make it.
Yeah.
Instead of having a whole other like band set to prepare for Sex Bomb. But no, there's I think if we're talking stuff that's missing from the comics, I think I do have more small issues, just in that Envy and Kim Pine got a lot less to do.
Yeah.
And Kim Pine was my favorite character in the comic. She almost fills like a Princess Carolyn role in BoJack Horseman Scott. Just being like the ex who's still endlessly supportive and might still have some feelings towards him. And I think she's just a very compelling and funny character. And she didn't get to do that much in the show, and neither did Envy. But that also made me realize their arcs in the comic really revolved around their relationship to Scott. And with him not there, they didn't have a lot to do, which I think is kind of telling about the original graphic novel, right? Scott has like 4 women that are falling all over him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is interesting. I did have that in my notes originally, that like, because Ramona gets the focus, then all of her exes, who are mostly males, get like a lot of focus and get to like make up for the shitty things that they did. But then like the fact that Envy doesn't get a lot to do. I didn't have this listed in my things I didn't like, but what a waste of Brie Larson to bring her back and then again not really use her.
Yeah.
A pro is that they did the song Black Sheep very briefly in the show, and I love that song. So yeah.
It's a bop, and I thought it was cool that they had the audience sing it, because that almost shows not only Envy has become so popular, but Scott Pilgrim has become so popular that a whole crowd could sing the words. I think that's a cool evolution.
Yeah, that's a cool interpretation of that. I didn't think about that as I was watching that, but I love that. Cool. Question for you.
Yeah?
Hit
me.
if your exes started an evil ex league to attack someone that you were dating, what kind of weapons and powers would show up?
Sure. I've dated a lot of people. I've been in monogamous relationships with very few. I've kind of spent a lot of years as a slut, basically. So I think I've dated a lot of like badass type A people. Like one of my exes, we went to a Halloween party as like War and Peace. So I had like a harp and like an all white outfit, and she had like a leather jacket and a battle axe. I've dated a lot of people with that vibe. So I think it would be a lot of melee fighters.
Okay.
You know, I think it would be a lot of like baseball bats,
Yeah.
hockey sticks, maybe some like boxing glove situations. That would mostly be my cadre of evil exes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds pretty badass. So I love that.
Do you have a horde in mind?
No, I mean, I covered this when we first talked about Scott Pilgrim, but I only talked about the 2 monogamous relationships that I had, and I reached out to one and I just asked her, without giving her context, if you were evil and good at fighting, what would your weapon be?
Incredible.
Yeah, and she said throwing daggers, but then Dylan pointed out, because he also knows this person, that this woman owns 2 pet turtles, and he thinks that she should incorporate that into her evil villain persona.
I mean, she's just a Beastmaster Ranger then, right?
Right.
Throwing
See,
daggers and animal companions.
you put it better than I did in my episode, so thank you for saying that.
Gotcha covered.
Beautiful. Yeah, she listened to that, and if she listened to this, yeah, you're a Beastmaster Ranger, and we love that for you. Yeah. And then the other ex, did you see the movie Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1?
No.
Okay. Well, there's a character named Ilsa Faust, and she's played by Rebecca Ferguson. And in the desert, she wears an eye patch and has a sniper, and she's not missing an eye. It's because the actress can't wink. She can't keep one eye closed and look through a scope.
Wow.
So she has to wear the eye patch. So they attributed that to the character as well.
That's cool.
It is cool. It's badass. So my other ex, I gave her a rifle, or a sniper rifle, and an eye patch.
Look at us being so like, wow, we dated a lot of badass people.
Yeah. We want them to know that we view them in this cool, badass way.
I hold nothing against any of the people I've dated. I feel like, if anything, I was the asshole in a fair amount of cases. So
Yeah.
I am the evil ex. That's fine.
I would, I guess, say that too. So if you're listening, our exes, yeah.
Sorry.
All right, the last question here is like kind of basic, but I have to ask it. Would you want a season 2? And if there was a second season announced, what would you want or expect from it?
More Kim Pine. I want so much more Kim Pine. She's my favorite character. She's great. She's so fun. Yeah, it's just fleshing out the characters that didn't get the same amount of attention, either in the movie or in the comic or the show. I want Kim Pine. I want to see Lisa, who was comic exclusive and was another woman falling all over Scott Pilgrim. She was very funny in the comics, and I think it's kind of rough because she definitely did represent it felt like the male POV of the one who got away. Like, there were a lot of shots of her like hanging out in her shorts and stuff like that. But I feel like that posed an interesting dilemma for Scott, and it was like a sign of his maturity that it's not something that he pursued. But I'd love to see characters like Kim, like Lisa, like Envy, specifically the women who had their arcs revolve around Scott, get more lives outside of it. That's what we got for Knives, right? We found she's an incredible musician. Yeah,
that was a really great change, I think, for her. The new songs that came out of this too. We didn't even talk about that. There's so much more we could talk about. But yeah, I like that pitch a lot. I do think one of my gripes was the lack of Envy Adams development. So I would love to see that. I would almost like to see like an Envy focused season that can highlight these other women as well. And maybe you could get a Kim Pine season. And
they could just do a Birds of Prey thing.
Oh, that'd be fun. Yeah. Cool. So I think that's going to be it, unless there's anything else you wanted to bring up about Scott Pilgrim Takes Off.
Give me a second, because I'm writing an article on it right now. So I just want to see if there's anything I might have missed, because I did accidentally see this show 3 times. So I have a lot of thoughts on it. Okay. I think I do have like some final thoughts on the whole situation. So first of all, better queer representation, better representation of the people of color in the show, which is great. It feels like that was very much a conscious effort. It's a very gay show now, which we love. But I think my final takeaway from the show is that initially I was disappointed that we didn't get a faithful animated adaptation of the Scott Pilgrim comics. And then I kind of sat and thought with myself, why do I feel like that's something we need when the comic book is still something we have? Why do we feel like pieces of media can get ruined by their sequels? You know, like there's a lot of people who dislike The Last Jedi because it was a very anti-nostalgic text, but that doesn't stop the original movies from existing. You know, why do we see media that is on a television screen as superior to print media when Brian Lee O'Malley is a comic book author before he is a television show writer? We were basically given this incredible new animated story, and we didn't lose access to the comic book. We didn't lose access to the game. We didn't lose access to the movie. We still have all of those, and we got a new thing. So I think good job, everyone.
Yeah, that's perfect, Julian. So that's going to wrap us up. Thanks, everyone, for listening. You can check us out on Facebook and Twitter. We have a Patreon, and you can hear us everywhere you get your podcasts. Julian, where can people find you, and do you have anything that you want to plug?
Sure. You can find me on most social media sites that I use, primarily Twitter and Twitch, as JuliCL. That is JuliCiel. I am a tabletop game streamer, indie game promoter, award-winning fantasy writer of an audio series called The Realm Tree. If you're into voice acting, there's a lot to enjoy there. We have some fairly prominent voice actors on board, including Michaela Jill Murphy, who voiced Toph in Avatar: The Last Airbender, and Risa May, who is a friend of mine and a huge rising star in the VO industry. She's got a lot of awesome credits coming up. It started with Genshin Impact, and it's just going up from there. I'm a co-host of the TTRPG channel Roll D5, which exclusively plays indie tabletop games. One of the things I do in the tabletop space is I try to boost the profile of indie games, indie game designers beyond Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, because there's a lot of amazing games out there, not only with different mechanics, but also different cultural contexts. So one designer I've been working with is Makapatag, or Joaquin Saavedra, one of the co-creators of the Gubat Banwa tabletop game system, which is based on pre-colonial Southeast Asia and the Philippines. So really what I do in the tabletop space is boost the profile of games like that. You can do anything in D&D, sure, but here's mechanics for actually creating a character who rides on top of a crocodile, you know? Here's a game based around that.
Yeah, it's sick as hell.
I think that's most of what I want to promote. I have my hands in a lot of pies. I think primarily everything I do is to support the awesome people that have chosen me as a collaborator, to my great honor. So all the channels I work on, all the audio series I work on, etc., check out the work that we've been able to put together.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll try to include links to as much of that as I can.
It's a lot. Sorry.
No, that's great. I mean, it's just an impressive amount of work. And you know, I've played games with you. I've seen some of your work. It's all great. So you really should check out everything that Julian is doing. But that's going to be it for this episode. Thanks so much, and we will see you at the movies.